In this episode of Militaria at the museum, we'll see the prototype of a sonar device that was towed behind vessels at variable underwater depths. Then we'll explore the advancements between a World War II torpedo bomber and its post-war successor. Finally, we'll see one-of-a-kind wood carvings that were used to help carry out an internment camp escape plan formulated by German POWs. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the museum. Sonar is the name for the technology that uses sound wave propagations to detect objects, measure distances, navigate, and communicate on or under the surface of the water. The Naval Museum has a trial version of a specific sonar device called the Variable Depth Sonar. I'm meeting with expert Rick Sanderson to check it out. Rick, I understand that you have a reasonably early example of a variable depth sonar that would be towed behind a ship here.
Yes, this was a proof of concept object, and we have it set up here in the library if you'd like to take a look at.
Oh, that would be great. What exactly are we looking at here?
We're looking at a proof of concept for a variable depth sonar array. This is a model, basically a scale model of something that would be fully functional, but this one is not functional. It's only to test the cavitation produced by the fins, how good the cable is, and whether this goes straight in the line that you want it to go or whether it's going to wobble off.
Right.
Proof of concept means that this is going to work. Let's size it up.
This is something that was eventually sized up, was
Yes,
it not?
very much so.
Right. And what sort of ships were towing these?
Destroyer escorts, destroyers, and vessels of that class.
Right. And do we know the sort of numbers of these that would have been used by the Canadian forces?
Well, we're a small Navy, so you're probably looking in the range of about 40 of these.
Right. Rick, this is obviously a more recent iteration of sonar technology, but could you take us back to the early origins of sonar technology itself?
I would be pleased to do that. Sonar, of course, is sound ranging, and sound is an energy that passes through water. So sonar is the attempt to find that vessel, find what direction it is in, and what direction it's going to.
And when did that technology start to be harnessed?
You're looking at the early part of the Second World War, 1942, 41, right in there. And many nations were working on sonar. They're well aware of what each other's navies were doing, but they're also working on countermeasures for that as well, because everybody knew that their vessels produce sound. There's no getting away from that. There's no such thing as a silent vessel. A vessel that is moving through the water is producing sound. And that sound can be picked up by the appropriate array on board another vessel or on land, in fact. And that is passive sonar. Nothing is happening from the listening array. It's totally coming from the ship at sea. Active sonar is when a ship sends out a signal that is then bounced off a target and returns to you. It was found fairly early on that there were different layers of temperature within water, and each has its own salinity, turbidity, which is the amount of stuff that's in the water, that and temperature as well. All of that affects how sonar operates. The U-boats particularly were operating in the second layer down, and that was not as effectively picked up on passive or active sonar.
So they were just within a very small area that allowed them to escape the current sonar technology at the
Exactly,
time.
yeah, and the Germans were certainly aware of that. This is one of the examples of, it's actually a proof of concept is what it's called. It is not an active sonar or passive sonar. All it is a very heavy lump of steel that's used to test out whether or not that kind of technology could be used in the ships of the time. And they were towed either on the stern or on the side, and there was a whole bunch of different kinds of sensors that were being tested out and ways of towing as well, because they knew nothing about the technology. Basically, they had to figure out what was the proper shape for it, so that it would not cavitate or so that it would not rip away and it would stay in the line that they wanted it to go in. Canada is well known as one of in the forefront of developing towed array sonar capable objects like these. Defense Research Establishment Atlantic, which is just across the harbor here in Dartmouth. There was another one in the Pacific side, and then it was all coordinated through Ottawa in the National Research Center. They were heavily involved and still are in the acoustic arrays. This one right here is one that became much more successful, but it took a long time to figure that one out.
One would imagine that the adoption of sonar technology would have a massive impact on naval exercises, particularly during wartime. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think a good example of that is what happened to the U-boat campaigns during the Second World War. Once the sonar was being widely used by the Allies, then the German kill rate of freighters and warships dropped dramatically, and they lost a very large number of U-boats until they could develop countermeasures, which for them was a new torpedo.
60 years on from the adoption of this sort of technology for which we're looking at the proof of concept, how has sonar changed today, Rick, and what would a unit such as this look like now?
The technology has advanced. There's quite a different set of arrays that are picking up information, and there's new materials that are being used as well. The towed array is not as widely used as it was. Sonobuoys dropped from helicopters have largely replaced it because they can get out further to the target very, very quickly, and you're not actually towing something that's 2,000 feet long behind your ship.
Right. What is a sonobuoy, Rick?
Sonobuoy is a tube basically that has a cable inside of it that has hydrophones along specific distances along that cable, and that cable can be extremely long, can be several hundred feet. And that tube will be dropped over the side, and as soon as it hits the water, it deploys that tube. And from one end of the tube and then from the other end of the tube, it deploys a radio. And that radio sends a signal back to whoever has sent that sonobuoy out.
Right, so it's similar to this technology, but it's not relying on being towed or connected in any way.
It's freestanding.
Rick, thank you for sitting down and talking me through the adoption of sonar technology.
You're very welcome. It's been a lot of fun for me too.
After the commercial break, I'll visit the Aviation Museum to analyze the evolution from one Grumman aircraft to another. At the Aviation Museum, President Mark People is going to show me the Grumman Avenger and its successor, the Grumman Tracker. The Avenger was the most effective and widely used torpedo bomber of World War II and was integral to the victory in the Battle of Midway. After the war, it was replaced with the Tracker, which was better equipped for anti-submarine warfare. I've heard quite a bit about the Avenger, but I don't know much about its successor, the Tracker.
Well, the Grumman Avenger was an evolution to the Grumman Tracker, was going from one engine to two engines, and now we've got an aircraft that's designed much more for anti-submarine work. And the Grumman Avenger was originally designed as a torpedo bomber, whereas the Tracker was being designed pretty much as an anti-submarine aircraft right from the get-go.
I have to say, Mark, the first thing that really strikes me about the Avenger is the sheer scale of it, particularly when you think about it landing on an aircraft carrier.
This particular aircraft was designed for torpedo bombing, and that's why we've got such a long bomb bay underneath the aircraft, and that was to fit a torpedo. The principal operational use of the Grumman Avenger started in 1942 and then initially used at the Battle of Midway. There was a small number available, but mainly used in the Pacific Campaign, flying off U.S. Navy aircraft carriers and later flying off British Royal Navy aircraft carriers that were obviously operating in the Pacific area.
Mark, certainly one of the most obvious features of this plane is that folding wing.
Well, the folding wing was a Grumman patented design, and they decided that they would be able to stow the wing that way. And it's a fairly unique design. They could cram this on a very small flight deck. They could fly it off carriers, and it's not a small aircraft.
And so, I mean, we know that this was a very effective plane to be using on an aircraft carrier. What sort of role did it have in the war? Did it have a large impact?
Yes. I mean, just because they built so many of them, but also it was relatively easy to fly. It was relatively stable. It didn't have too many bad vices. And you could put bombs and you could put rockets and you could multitask with it.
What was it really that led to its eventual replacement with the tracker?
As with all of these, we see with a lot of these aircraft design, the evolution really is forcing it. The minute the aircraft is designed and built, it's sometimes outdated. It's the single engine, single pilot is going to be the biggest issue with it. But ironically, the Avenger, even after military service, continued on in civilian service with spray plane operation and also firebombing. And this particular aircraft is configured as a firefighting bomber. The service post-war in these utility type uses was actually longer than military service. So I guess it's not really a replacement. Yes, they became outdated, but they still served in different roles, and the longevity of the airframe and the ruggedness of the airframe made that use possible.
Mark, we've done a lot of talking about the Avenger, and I was wondering if we could learn a little bit more about the tracker now.
I think getting inside the tracker will really demonstrate what it's like to be a crew member inside a anti-submarine aircraft from the 50s. So yes, let's do it.
That sounds great to me. Wow, Mark, I have to say, you can be there down on the ground looking at it, but it's pretty different when you get up in these things, and it really gives you a sense of how high up off the ground you are.
And fairly confined in this, but now we have 2 pilots instead of the 1.
Right.
So we're now sharing the workload, but we now have to manage 2 engines. We've got 2 operators in the back, the sonar buoy operators and radio operators behind us. And now we've got a functioning anti-submarine aircraft, which is certainly more refined than the previous Grumman Avenger.
I mean, looking around, there's so many gauges and buttons and levers and as you said, 2 pilots, 2 controls. So, I mean, how does that work, Mark?
They basically, yes, they run simultaneously. The captain would be sitting in this seat here, would be just in charge of the aircraft and flying it, and the co-pilot would be assigned duties as required, either setting up for landing or whatever. So the other thing you got to remember is that this aircraft is designed for carrier operations. So not only is the complex issue about flying the plane, but now also we are actually going to have to get it off an aircraft carrier, get catapulted off, and then come back and land it.
There's a few obvious differences between these 2 planes. As we talked about, that's the Avenger's a single-engine plane, and there's 1 pilot, is there, on that plane?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are some of the other things that would have changed?
Well, obviously, the complexity of the cockpit is going to be changing. The issue, of course, you've got 2 sets of instruments because you've got 2 engines, not 1. And then the weapon systems you've got in the back. You're dropping sonar buoys, which would be projected and dropped in the ocean so they could listen for submarines. You've got those changes coming as well. So the tracker is now certainly becoming more of a unit that's designed for anti-submarine specifically, and that's it.
Right.
Now, of course, you do have a bomb bay in this aircraft too, so you can drop your ordnance by the homing torpedoes or whatever else you want to drop. And then you've got on the wing, you've got hard points for rockets as well too. So you could fire rockets and technically bombs off the wings as well too. So more versatile, more able to handle the requirements that it's designed for, which is at this point is anti-submarine.
Mark, I know that the period in which the tracker was being used is not one in which Canada had really a lot of military engagements and conflicts, certainly. So how many of these were they making?
Well, it's interesting because this particular tracker was built by de Havilland in Canada, and it was one of 99 built on the production line there. So it would have entered service in the early 60s, and it would have been attached to HMCS Bonaventure, which was Royal Canadian Navy's last aircraft carrier. And on that, it would have been operational 1962. They would have been operational during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That would probably be the biggest operation. And then they moved on from there. But the tracker served with the Navy and then ultimately with the Air Force until 1990.
What is the sort of enduring legacy of this plane?
Well, this particular plane, I mean, obviously it was the only aircraft that Canada ordered and built for the Royal Canadian Navy. It was the integration of aircraft carrier wings and aircraft to actually use as anti-submarine and really the culmination of technology that you're seeing of that. And it certainly represents a very high point within the Royal Canadian Navy and of tracker operations. It's great to be able to look inside and see everything in here and get a truer understanding. Once you're inside it, you realize that it's a lot more to it than it looks.
Absolutely. So Mark, I've got to ask, how do we get out of here?
Well, I think the only way is up on this one. And I think at this point, we're going to have to scramble out the top and hopefully don't fall off the other side.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Coming up next, I'll get to see some decoys and tools that were crafted by German prisoners of war and used during their daring escape from the Fort Henry internment camp. I'm at the Army Museum to meet with Executive Director Gary Melville and get a closer look at a decoy head and hand that were carved out of wood by German POWs at the Fort Henry internment camp in Kingston, Ontario. I'm hoping to discover how 19 German POWs escaped Fort Henry during World War II and what role the decoys played in their plan. Gary, this is quite an array of artifacts, both in their number and their variety in front of us. What can you tell me about what we're looking at?
So Sandy, what we have is a variety of artifacts that were recovered after a prisoner of war escape in Fort Henry in Kingston, Ontario during the Second World War. Fort Henry was being used as an internment camp for prisoners of war and for enemy aliens. And in 1943, there was an escape of 19 prisoners. And these tools were some of the things that they employed to break out of the prison. They found the 19 of the smallest prisoners because the plan was to go down through the sewage drains and then out of the camp, and out they went. They were all recaptured, but it showed that there was flaws in the system and all the safeguards weren't there. You can see that obviously someone came up with a master plan, like for these saws.
Right.
All of them are the same. They've all got this tensioning wire or rope on top that this would then spin, and now to keep the tension so that this would be, as tense as possible so that the saw wouldn't break. But then you got what I call the sort of like the more ingenious artifacts, and that here.
Right.
So you've got these two artifacts here that were used for carving, which is how they were able to make the hand
Right.
and the head. Then you've got this here, which is a drill. And so they've gotten a straight thing, and then probably used this, which is a file, and it's only a bit of a file.
Right.
Probably this was a broken tool that then they were able to adapt. So I'm now able to keep all of these sharp. I'm able to make that. And then I love this one, and it's a coat hanger, right? Coat hanger that's been cut, made like that, pound that flat, and then twist it, and now you have the drill.
Wow. So we don't know exactly how these made their way out of Fort Henry?
No, we don't. That's a bit of a mystery for us. We've speculated that one of the former members of our Board of Governors, who was in the Intelligence Corps in the Second World War, had something to do with artifacts getting down here, either for prosperity or to train other soldiers.
Gary, certain things in front of us are obvious in their purpose. This was obviously sort of a decoy so that the guards wouldn't see that the 19 men had escaped. But what do we know about how things like the saws would have been used? Were they used in the manufacture of the decoys or for the actual escape itself?
Again, a good question, Sandy, and we just have to hypothesize.
Right.
So I would say that the saws were used to cut down the wood.
Sure.
Right? And the drills and the saws would probably be getting it to close to shape.
Gary, looking at the head here, is that real hair?
Yes, it is, Sandy. So unfortunately, time has not been a friend to this artifact, and the glue is beginning to give away. So as a result, some of these tufts here, well, I accidentally touched it, but you can see are very, very loose. Otherwise, I could say, oh, we can do a shot with it beside your head and see who's more handsome. But what we'll do is we'll spin it around, and you can see that there was eyelashes put in there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and then the hair, and the hair would have been very simple to get.
Sure.
They were all getting haircuts quite regularly.
Right.
You sweep it up and you save it.
From what I understand, there were sort of 16 original escapees that were captured, but there were 3 more that sort of remained on the lam a bit longer. Is that right?
Yeah, so 3 of them were captured, I believe it was the 1st of September, so they managed to be free for about 3 weeks. And they were caught near the border by the border guards, and they were in a field picking apples, obviously, to feed themselves.
Right.
Someone noticed this and reported them, and then they were picked up. So no one made it out, and in fact, in Canada in the Second World War, there was only 1 prisoner of war that actually escaped and made it back to Germany.
Really?
Yeah, that was not from Kingston.
Quite a long way to go, though, to get from Canada back to Germany.
Well, the United States was neutral at the time, so all he had to do was get himself into the States. He surrendered to the police. He is, a German. The embassy took him on. They shipped him home.
Huh, that's quite something.
Because Canada was so large, and I believe that we were rather smart where we positioned the camps, it was a long way to go to get away. And then once the United States entered the war, on our side, escaping to the United States was not an option for you.
So Gary, the men have been recaptured, but what happens to them once the war is over? Did they go back to Germany, remain in Canada?
So once the war was over, the prisoners of war were repatriated back to Germany, and a lot actually stayed in Canada. They decided to immigrate, they applied, and moved here and became Canadian citizens and lived their lives here.
Do we know anything about the 19 men that escaped? What happened to them after the war, or does the trail sort of go cold?
The trail is very cold. It's not a very warm trail at all for any of this story.
Right.
The fact that we had names of the 3 merchant marine guys that were captured, the last 3 captured, I thought was quite good. No idea who the other 16 were.
Gary, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to see these artifacts. I mean, it really is a story very much out of the movies, and it's hard to believe that we're standing here with things that actually were involved in an escape of that level.
Well, Sandy, you're quite welcome. As I'm sure we've said many times, the Army Museum is full of wonderful artifacts such as this, and we only have so much room to tell stories. So any opportunity we can to tell stories like this and let people know what's out there I think is beneficial to everyone.
Oh, certainly. Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.